Kim's presentation just now was really the redacted version, the short version of a lot of data and all these interviews and all that material that we will work with and put together in written form so that it's useful for the community. When we were doing the community feedback sessions the last few weeks, I said, well, she was kind of the glass half full, it's half empty, and I'm kind of the glass half full. Because certainly in the interviews, you talked about the angst, you talked about the sense of loss and of change, and can we make it, and is the next generation going to make it? These are really important questions, and I think increasingly it's recognized that there are real mental health issues in agriculture as we go through this crisis. I mean, it's been happening for decades, but there's another generation going through it right now. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture in their meeting in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago did a half day on mental health in farming, because there's some real challenges happening in this sector in ways that the organizations and government agencies involved have to take them very seriously. That said, there's also another way to look at the interviews that we did, which is through a lens of assets or capital. And this framework up here is the idea that if you're going to have a healthy community, it's built on a whole variety of assets or capital. Whether it's the human capital, that's the labor, the natural capital, the natural environment, the buildings and infrastructure and roads, the finances that support it all, and the social and political capital, the connections and bonds within a community and outside of a community that allow you to invest these different assets and turn them into something that creates new opportunities in the community. This is a framework for thinking about community development and community economic development. Not only at a community level, like these are sort of community ideas of a healthy ecosystem, vital economy, and social well-being, but it's equally true at the farm level, or at a household level, that you're working with a variety of assets to find pathways forward. And so what I did is spent some time with Kim's interview data with this lens and kind of said, what are people in the community talking about as the assets? You don't have to use the capital language, but as the assets to build on within this community. And so I'll just share some of the ideas that came out of that. I just want to, this is the one. So on the question of natural and built capital, as you know, this is a very big county from north to south. It has an enormous amount of geographic diversity, has diversity in the kinds of farming that work here and have been effective now and in the past, and maybe even going into the future. There's mixed soil quality, and what I was noticing is that many farmers are using the natural diversity of this county to their advantages in ways that they can. Growing on larger acreages down here in the south end, and taking care of that soil and their crops. And then in many parts of this county, it's smaller parcel sizes, and it's like you're working within the rocks, right? But when we were in Maynooth last week, there are farmers out there who are making a living when you combine it with other assets that they have, and we'll get to that, usually an off-farm income as well, to service local markets and to service to even cow-calf operations that are sending into other parts of the province. So using the small parcel sizes that are available in this county to work for smaller farms. And so this is, as we go along, you'll hear that there are a number of businesses, you probably know some of them, that are starting off small farms that only want a small amount of acreage, whether it's in market gardening or other kinds of intensive agriculture. And Hastings County has smaller parcel sizes where it's easier to kind of buy that kind of land because of the price that land is available at, and to do a small business on it. Whereas if that same person were down in southwestern Ontario, the smaller parcel size just might not be there. We're noticing that people are using equipment suited to these scales. So often equipment that's maybe less expensive, repairable, shared among neighbors. The theme of neighbors was really strong through all of this. There's a number of provincially inspected meat processing plants in the community that are still accessible, and people are able to raise a variety of types of livestock and get that slaughtered provincially. Might not be federally inspected, and so that might create a regulatory barrier to certain kinds of markets. But nonetheless, compared to some parts of this province, these are accessible assets. And we also heard a little bit about the farmers markets, Grills Orchard, Two Rivers Food Hub. I know Two Rivers isn't in Hastings County, but there are Hastings County producers that are using it to access other markets and to process their what they're growing on the farm. When it came to financial capital, this was interesting because we certainly heard about people growing soybeans and corn and selling into commodity markets and selling the corn into ethanol production and so on. But very few people talked about that as the strategy for the future. Maybe while prices were high for a few years, it made some sense to grow a few more acres in those crops and sell into those commodity markets. But when I have to say that we are definitely hearing more on the sort of direct marketing side, whether it's farmers markets or other ways that you can connect directly with your customers through restaurants and so on, as giving the farmer a greater degree of control over price. You never fully control the price, but a greater degree, and maybe also an ability to control quality and then be able to get a better price for that. We also did hear about the fact that the land is lower priced in the county can be advantageous for somebody who wants to buy it. But it also means that you have less equity if you're trying to leverage that land to get more equipment for your farm or build barns and so on. And so this is a real challenge. We also heard across the board people had members of the family working off farm as a way to make the farm operation work, right? So whether that's one person or two people or three people working off farm in some cases. And that was for farms of all sizes. And this fits with provincial trends and national trends in Canada as well. I think it's part of the new reality of agriculture that there's going to be an off-farm income as part of what makes it work to live on that farm. And then we also did hear about how there are certain tax incentives, whether provincial or federal level, that are part of the financial assets that people are working with. When it comes to human capital, we didn't actually hear very much about farms with hired labor from outside, whether migrant workers or local workers or whatever. I'm sure they are there in some of the operations, but not many of the people we spoke to were working with off-farm labor. It was often family labor. There was a real pride of self-sufficiency and of being able to do a variety of things on your own farm, a reliance on neighbors. I put new rural residents friend or foe because there was a real mixed feeling about people buying land, maybe with money from the city and coming out here and buying land, putting a few horses on it, bringing up the price of hay on the one hand, which is competition for other farmers who need to buy that hay. And on the other hand, we talked to the person who's selling them the hay and saying, hey, there's a strategy in selling hay to the horse people. So it's kind of a mixed relationship. We also heard about new rural residents, I think it was phoning the police on an escaped cow or calf, rather than phoning their neighbor. Just not really knowing what life in the country is like and how to deal with their neighbors. Not naming any names. And we also, as we were doing the report back sessions, there's also support for this community beyond its borders, right? So the Northumberland's, Ontario's Agri-Food Venture Centre that was created just the last few years in Northumberland County as an opportunity for people to develop value-added processed goods for farm businesses. It's down the road. It's not somewhere you would go every week, but it still represents an opportunity for this community. On the side of cultural capital, one of the ways to think about this is the power of ideas and new ideas to kind of stimulate new opportunities. And certainly the farms that we talked to, there was a deep ethic of sustainability, including for many sort of a pride in being able to do things for themselves and a self-sufficiency ethic. And this ties to the last idea here about deep knowledge of innovative sustainability practices. We heard about carbon strategies for carbon sequestration and crop rotation and rotational grazing, tree fodder. There are people using branches from trees as food for their goats. Some innovative strategies that I don't think everybody else in Ontario is doing, but that I think represent, if this community can better share the strategies that people are doing at the farm level, there can be some real innovation that just comes through that. And we also heard about, from a number of people about a growing market for food that customers know and can accept. This connects into the direct marketing and so on. Social capital. As I mentioned, these are the bonds and connections within a community and beyond. We heard about professional support for succession planning coming from various organizations, which is really important for those farms who have to make that step from one generation to the next. We heard about farms doing agricultural education with the schools and doing agritourism at the farms, and how getting a class load of kids to your farms doesn't just mean that class gets educated, but they bring their parents back and they bring their siblings back to have a similar experience. And so I understand not everybody wants a whole class full of kids on their farms. Many wouldn't be allowed if they wanted to because of the sort of biohazards. But for farms that want to connect with the public in new ways, we definitely heard about some opportunities. We also heard about several local organizations, whether the Cattlemen's and Harvest Hastings and others, who are here to serve and support the agricultural community. And that's great. We also heard about some people who felt like they went to those meetings and didn't feel welcome necessarily, because maybe they were newer to farming, or a young woman, or whatever. There's some difference that the people in the room recognize about them, and they didn't necessarily feel like they were part of the community in that way. And I think that's quite important because, you're all in it together, right? This community is in it together, and so figuring out how to bridge these differences, I think, is going to be part of the future of farming in this county. Finally, we heard a lot of great policy suggestions about things that could change through federal regulations, provincial regulations, local planning and zoning and so on. And we will collect that stuff together and bring it to the attention of those policy communities. But it was interesting that we didn't hear, when I got to this sheet, I had all the different kinds of capitals and assets laid out on different sheets, and I was going through all the interview transcripts. It didn't stand out as, that sheet was almost empty when I got towards the end of my cataloging, and I kind of had to go back and say, how is this community connected? Now, admittedly, we didn't ask this question directly, how are you all connected? But it raised the question for me because regulations, as Kim pointed out, came up a lot. Regulations that seem to be designed for larger scales of agriculture, impact